Good evening and welcome again to Public Perspective. I'm your host, Kevin McDermott. And in this time of the Me Too movement and other movements like that, it's a difficult topic for anyone to look at and discuss dispassionately. So tonight we bring an author who has a slightly different view of what the relations are between men and women, what gender relations are. We have the author of the book, Tim Goldich. Tim, it's such a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you, Kevin. It's a great opportunity. Thank you.
Yeah, and your book is Loving Men, Respecting Women.
Yes.
So,
yes, it almost doesn't come out so easily, right? Because we sort of want to say respecting men, loving women. That's what's sort of ingrained. So this is the opposite, because I believe that's what's needed.
So let's talk about that. I mean, that is the basic, the central idea of the book. So your essential premise is that generally men are respected and women are loved today, that's the status quo.
Yeah, or I'll put it this way, that men are more respected, less loved. Women are more loved, less respected.
And that if we can bring about more of an equality in those characters, everyone will be better off.
Yes.
So what prompted you to address this subject in the first place?
Well, because I was looking out at the world and the gender relations and the great reduction in marriages and the failures of marriages, and that now I gather that the majority of children are born to single mothers, and there's such an estrangement, such a wedge between the sexes. I just thought it was tragic, and I looked for ways to resolve that and heal the divide.
So it would be easy, I think, to look at the book and think, well, this is a defense of men and on almost a counter movement to feminism. But I take it that's not really what
That's
you're
not
getting
my
at there.
intention, no. No, there's, I will call it feminism on one hand, and I'll just call it masculism on the other, because these words just mirror each other. Because what I see in gender is mirrors. But my intention is equalism, which basically begins with the sexes calling it even and moving on from there. In my judgment, everything begins with calling it even. If I realize we're very far from doing that, and it probably won't happen in my lifetime, but that is what I am suggesting.
Well, what would that look like, the calling it even? I mean, a man meets a woman and they're attracted to each other. What has to happen to call it even from the outset?
Well, look at it from a societal standpoint. So what that means is we look at gender history and the here and now also as men and women being about equal in number and evenly matched, and about equal overall weaponry, and that the two sexes, each through their own separate channels, apply equal force of influence in the human system, and are therefore equally responsible for outcomes. And the biggest challenge is going to be to reach for this one. In my belief, you see, the enormous consequences and vast repercussions suffered by women for being less respected have been matched in full by the enormous consequences and vast repercussions suffered by men for being less loved.
So that's the point that I think is not seen. I mean, I think it's well understood in contemporary American society that women face a respect problem. I think that's what the Me Too movement
Right.
and what's it, Time's Up is about.
Yes.
But what are the consequences to men? I mean, men basically run things.
Yeah.
How are they suffering?
Well, men run the world of men, but there's a whole world of women that includes love, home, family, parenting, social fabric. These things are just as important as what men are in charge of. And how do men suffer being less loved? Well, I mean, men are the vast majority of the homeless, imprisoned, failing throughout the education system, in terms of at-work fatalities. All 10 of the 10 most hazardous jobs, as well as the bottom 24 of the 25 worst jobs, as rated by the Jobs Rated Almanac, are all 90 to 100% male occupied. Men are about 16 times more likely to die on the job than a woman. Now, see, I don't want to really dwell on these kind of these negativities, but I do need to sort of show what goes on the other side of the balance beam, you see. And so the reason why don't we concern, the fact of the matter is that men are 4.5 times as likely to commit suicide as women. And why are these concerns not raised to the level of major societal concerns? Well, because men are less loved, less empathized with, and because we need men to be men. We need men to be tough and strong and deal with it and you know, man up. And that's been the male role. And men are complicitous in the whole thing. I always see everything as being basically male-female in equal partnership in the human system. Men, for their part, they just reject victim. They don't want to hear it. It's such the antithesis of what being male is.
But is that necessarily bad? I mean, the idea of,
no.
I mean, if you see yourself as a victim,
yeah.
And then that becomes a definition of who you are, or a
it's
partial
terrible.
definition. Yeah, it's a terrible spot to be in.
Right, that's a spot women are in, and no, I wouldn't see men suffer that. What I would say, I'm not trying to add men to the list of victims, which grows longer every day.
Yeah.
No, I'm actually trying to remove women from that list because, not because she hasn't been victimized, but because men and women have been victimized, if that's how you want to look at it, in equal measure.
So, in a relationship, I know you talk about sexual dynamics in your book, and you talk about relationship dynamics. Coming back to the question I posed a minute ago, a man and a woman meet each other, they're attracted, they want to form a relationship with each other.
Yeah.
How do they establish this kind of equality you're talking about? How do they recognize the strengths and weaknesses and not expect each other to be identical? You know, I wouldn't. I mean, why would I marry someone just like me? That would be horribly boring, right?
Right. I wouldn't want to do that.
I wouldn't want to do that. No. But how do you set the stage? I mean, we talk in.
Well, you see, I don't really deal with the individual men and women. I'm really looking at bell curves. I'm looking at the major societal mechanisms that cause this whole gender rift. As far as individual men and women, they need to work that out on an individual basis. And anything goes, you know, whatever they want. If it works out for the woman to make the money and for the man to stay home and look after the children, well, fine. That you know, whatever works for them. They're going to have to find that on an individual basis. But for society, you see, what I see, like in the Me Too movement and so on, is, well, let me try it this way. Let me try it this way. So perhaps the primary victimization of women, perhaps, okay, I'm going to suggest is drowning women in sympathy, which is, I think, dreadfully disempowering. It is compassion sans accountability, which I think is infantilizing. It is telling women that they are the powerless victims in all things, which is emotionally self-fulfilling. It's telling them that there's a boogeyman behind every bush ready to jump out and rape them, which is terrifying. This is what's, in my view, this is the true victimization of women.
But a lot of that, what you mentioned, is real. I mean, men generally don't get raped. I mean, it happens, but it's not the same, anywhere near the same level or quantity.
Well, that's right. But women, men are almost twice as likely to be the victims of violent crime, and more than 3 times as likely to be murdered. So the idea that women are particularly vulnerable really just comes from the fact that women are smaller and weaker, and because they are so sexually desired. But at the same time, the instinct is to protect women. And for the most part, that's what happens. Women are generally protected.
Well, isn't this, I mean, doesn't this come back to the fundamentals of human society? Women bore children, so in tribal societies, women were highly valued because without them, the tribe wouldn't continue.
Right, and
you had to
throughout the
protect
evolutionary period, women were more valued because, you know, the group survival has basically come down to a simple formula. If your offspring have to equal or exceed the number of attrition, or your group dies out, right? So, and the number of women in your group, that's the sole factor in terms of how many children you can expect in your next generation, right? So for that and many other reasons, see, I think the instinct to protect women is particularly enhanced in humans for a number of reasons. And so I believe that a protect the female imperative is built into the human genetic code. And there's a lot more to say about that, because I think instincts are like seeds, and what they grow into, if anything, depends on the cultural soil in which they're planted. So it's very complicated. But yes, women are, that's instinctual.
So is that an advantage that women have? Is it something that, as you say, we may not be adding to the balance sheet to say that this is a plus that women enjoy?
Yeah, well, first of all, I don't believe in anything being a pure positive or pure negative. So I see an essential duality in all things. So there's pluses and minuses to all these things. And there's always a mirror opposite. Yes, women are prioritized in all things along the love axis, but it's instinctual to prioritize men along the respect axis. Generally, humans want males to be the leaders, the experts, the right, you know, the authority, and so that's instinctual also in my judgment. So these two instincts balance out.
But if they were to be, if we were to lead our lives strictly according to these instincts, then theoretically, you know, women would never take positions of power because they'd all be given to men. Which is not, at least according to current norms, that's not a desirable outcome.
That's why my book is called Loving Women, Respecting Men. Or, I'm sorry, Loving Men, Respecting Women.
Right.
Is exactly because there does have to be some measure of pushback on these instincts.
How do you, if it's a societal thing, I mean, when I think about sexual relations or intergender relations, you know, it is all personal, ultimately. It is a matter of individuals interacting with other individuals.
Yeah.
But if you do take the societal view, if you can't take the individual view, how do you get society to change? I mean, what is the mechanism to start moving in that direction?
Well, it's always been the same. It's about our movements, you know. Generally, you know, boy, movements are so tricky, right? Because, I mean, change doesn't really occur without them, but they usually go bad in some way or another. The most aggressive and neurotic types usually seize leadership at some point, and you know, the best intentions go badly. In my opinion, it all balances out is very unlikely to lead to all manner of mischief. I can't really imagine any it all balances out suicide bombers. You know, you're going. You know, it all balances out, you know, and take out a city block. You know, I think it's not the kind of concept that leads to that sort of extremism. See, on the one hand, it's incredibly radical, I guess, according to the norms of gender understanding. But on the other hand, it's about as moderate as you can get. Which
makes it difficult. I mean, like, yay, let's all rally behind moderation.
That's right.
Yeah, that doesn't happen often.
Right. So that very much is a challenge in equalism, because it's not about getting all worked up. It's about chilling things out a bit. Now that's not to say that equalism promotes the status quo. Not at all. Equalism is, in my judgment, a very progressive concept. It's a change. It's a radical change in gender outlook, and there's a huge mountain to climb, and it's about a lot of changes. But see, while equalism is primarily about, you know, if you see that the various powers and privileges that your opposite sex enjoys come at a cost, and the cost that each sex pays comes out even, and you see that your own sex enjoys powers and privileges in equal measure, well, what I envision is a vast reduction in intersex rage, rancor, resentment, victim, vengeance, you know, all these poisons that are dividing the sexes. So again, I see equalism as something that is impassioned, but it's not, you know, foaming at the mouth. It's not about, you know, burning things down. It's, you know.
It's smoothing things out.
Yeah.
So do you think that when you talk about the powers that men have and the powers that women have, do you think that equalism, it comes about as a matter of simply recognizing these different powers and the different strengths and the different sufferings that each side go through? Or do things have to fundamentally, does that power balance itself have to change? Or is it just a matter of recognizing that there are different powers and strengths?
Well, yeah. So as I figure it, the only actual real imbalance in the gender system, the only overarching imbalance in the gender system lies in the gender belief system. It's believing that men have the power and women are the victims, which is one-sided, which is why it's false, which is why it's toxic. So what I envision as the big step forward is understanding that well, that it all balances out. And what do I mean by that? Well, I mean that in the benefits enjoyed and the liabilities suffered, right? In the power and the victimization, the freedoms, the constraints, the joys, the sorrows, the good, the bad, the light, the shadow. It all balances out between woman and man, and it always has. That each sex has had their own version of the human condition, and that each sex has been responsible for creating this gender system. It was built in equal partnership between woman and man. I mean, the woman and man engaged in it equally. See, and I think they ratified it equally, and I think that both the sexes maintained it equally.
So if that's true, if both sexes contributed in equal measure to the status quo we see today,
Yeah.
well then where do you think the objections are coming from? Why is it that the Me Too movement, the sense of female victimization by men, how has that come about if in fact the underlying truth is that they're equal?
Well, because women eliciting more empathy is the key, that's the underlying factor of why only female concerns are raised to the level of major societal concerns. And if you live in this world that's constantly telling you that you are the victim, that's only looking at gender reality as it occurs along the respect axis, and only looking just at all the ways that women have been less respected, and you start looking at the world as if it were some kind of male heaven and female hell. And of course you're going to be enraged.
But generally, I mean, yes, sometimes fictions take hold as common belief, but if that's the current common understanding of how the world, certainly American society is, isn't there some underlying truth to that?
Sure. But it's what I would consider the male power female victimization paradigm is what I would consider half of gender reality that is presented and demanded to be accepted as if it were gender reality in its entirety. So I think what you're really asking is, why is this other half of gender reality been so suppressed? And well, because it's instinctual, because the story that men have the power and women are the victims is an erotic story. It's the story of hot, hunky heroes coming to the rescue of, you know, fair...
Beautiful damsels in distress.
In distress, yeah. You know, that's been going back to, you know...
beginning of literature.
Yeah, right, you know, mighty Odysseus and the fair Helen of Troy, you know, it goes right back to the Pleistocene, you know. It's embedded deeply in our sort of social DNA. And protecting women, that's part of it. You know, it's about caring more about the safety and prioritizing the safety of women, because for the whole evolutionary period of humans, there was survival value in that. Mm-hmm. In fact, I think it's one of the key reasons why humans, which are just undefended, not fleet of foot, you know, it would really made easy prey, right? I think it's one of the reasons we managed to survive.
And not just survive, become the dominant species.
Yeah.
Right. So I still come back, and I know I've asked this a couple of times, but I'm still
Okay,
unclear about how, or what needs to change. I mean, we talk about understanding the male side of the ledger, and loving men more. But given the male perspective that you mentioned earlier, man up, you know, like, hey, what? Yeah, look, you know, deal with it.
Yeah.
Just, you know, and that is so deeply ingrained.
That's I know. That's right.
But why? I mean, there's value in that too. So
There's always value in these things. Yeah, we don't do these things for no reason.
So what needs to change? How do you?
The gender belief system. It's the belief that men have the power and women are the victims. It's false. It's false and it's poisonous. It's tearing us apart. That's really what needs to change. We need to respect women enough to respect their power as equal partners in the human system and hold them to equal levels of accountability. That's respect, okay? Men, we need to love more. We need to have more empathy toward men, more understanding, even if it's just intellectual. We need to understand that the facts, you know, of the reality of it. Men are almost all imprisoned, and you know, men have their children taken from them in courts of law. You know, I mean, this is staggering things that are over there on the other end of the balance beam, and we need to recognize this balance, this essential balance, and then we move forward. But but you see, as long as gender politics is just my victim is bigger than your victim, it goes nowhere. It just goes nowhere.
Before I forget, I know we have a copy of your book here. Do you
Yeah.
mind putting that on your knee? And we'll,
Sure.
We'll have,
All right.
have a camera
Is
zoom
that-
in on it so that we can actually see what it looks like. So this is the book, The Future of Gender Politics,
Yeah.
Loving Men, Respecting Women.
The future of gender politics, that's
Yeah.
right.
Yeah. And it's available on Amazon
Sure.
and through your website, which
Yes.
we will put up at some point.
Uh-huh.
So coming back to this, though, and forgive me if I seem dim here, because it's a difficult concept to wrap your head around.
I know.
Right? Like,
It's not how it's taught in school, that's for sure.
well, so for example, women CEOs,
Yeah.
right? The number is declining, not increasing.
Yeah.
And women, I think, justifiably see that as being discrimination, bias against women. You know.
Okay. Well, is it though? Let's take a closer look at that. Do you want to be a CEO?
I personally, I do not, but there are a lot of men who do.
Neither do I.
Right.
But think about it. What does that mean? It means working incredible hours every week. It means sacrificing all kinds of interpersonal relationships, family. It means putting your health at risk. It means adopting a certain ruthlessness. You know, maybe women are not so many CEOs because they don't want it. I don't want it. You don't want it. So why is it so astonishing if women don't want it either? And the same goes for like senators. I mean, you really want to live your life in a fishbowl? You really want everything that's ever been you ever said or done, you know, subject to being pulled out and you know.
I think men don't like that nowadays either.
No, I think that's right.
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
so so part of the reason is that women simply prioritize a better life for themselves. They don't have such a feeling of need to compensate for being female in that particular way of earning that huge paycheck. Most women, if they're making a couple $100,000 a year, you know, why you know, I wouldn't need more than that. It's only a certain small select group of men that are just these hyper aggressives that are going for this kind of thing.
And do you think that in fact may be a condition of the male psyche as well, that this need to be the alpha male to be the guy in charge?
Again, I would say it's instinctual. Because throughout the evolutionary period, the more aggressive men were the alpha males, and they did most of the breeding, and so it's their genetic material that is passed down. So, yeah, I see biology as something that's underlying all these things. It doesn't mean that it can't change, but it does mean that we have to recognize what we're up against. We have to see it clearly.
Now, speaking of alpha males breeding. You had a very interesting bit in your book about Tiger Woods.
Oh my God, you're going to bring up Tiger Woods?
I am going to bring up Tiger Woods, yes. Which I thought was, in one sense, alarming, but in another, enlightening.
Yeah.
And you made up a response when when his wife, Ilan, divorced him.
Yeah.
Because he'd been philandering with many women.
Right.
And he issued this abject apology.
Sure.
Mea culpa,
Oh my God,
maxima
yeah.
culpa, right?
Right.
But you wrote an alternative
That's right.
that said, look, I'm a superstar. I earned where I am.
Yeah.
You were born beautiful. You had nothing to do with that.
Yes, you were sort of a genetic celebrity, and in response, I became an earned celebrity in order to match you and yeah, attract you, yeah.
And that you, Elan, benefited tremendously by marrying me.
Yeah, yeah.
And that you are not necessarily victimized here, because I, as a male, and what's one of the things I think about, I used to think about NBA stars who are always,
Yeah.
you know, they're always philandering, or they've lots of stories about them philandering.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, why would you bother to get married? Because you're out on the road and all these women are throwing themselves at you.
Yeah.
And this is part of what you describe about in your fictional response from Tiger.
Right.
About, look, these women aren't just suggesting, they're
Yeah.
clearly making themselves available. Beautiful, highly desirable women.
Incredibly desirable women, let's face it, yeah.
Constantly.
Right.
And so what do you expect me to do?
Right.
Is that right?
Yeah, it's so that was one of the essays. I've got a series of essays in the book that I call Arrows essays. So those were set aside to present emotion. And where the concept of arrows is like they're messages that you hear on in the media. The arrows are like take the form of jokes. Arrows take the form of policies and you know, all these remarks that target. Everybody's a target, but you know, some like ridiculing Father's Day. Okay, that's going to target males, not females. So the woman might be right next to the male when the announcement goes on. You know, oh, we sell cheap goods at a discount, so you can come here and not spend much on Dad for Father's Day, right? And you know, that's going to burn me. I'm going to feel that, but maybe the woman next to me maybe doesn't feel that, right? Because that arrow's not aimed at her. So, so the central concept in arrows is that I only can really know for sure the arrows that are aimed at me. I can't really know all these arrows that are aimed at women, right?
Right.
Some of them would just go right by me. I'm oblivious to them,
Sure.
right? Because I'm not the target of those. So the primary idea behind arrows is then it all balances out, becomes what I'll call a leap of faith, you see. A leap of faith that her pain doubtless equals mine, and mine equals hers. Just letting go of it and saying, you know, I can't feel what you feel, but I can make a leap of faith that what you feel is equal to what I feel.
And acknowledge that there is this equality of,
Yes.
of pain and
Right,
hurt.
right. So my editor challenged me to do Tiger Woods because that was like a worst case scenario. Like that's like, you know, that was just an open and shut case, right? I mean, the male is just guilty as can be, right?
Charged, right.
You know, and so he said, well, if you can flip that around, that'd be quite an accomplishment. So that's why I tried to do it.
And you did actually a remarkable job of giving it a different perspective. And believe it or not, we're out of time already.
Oh my God.
So Tim, I want to thank you so much for being here. It's been very enlightening for me, and I wish you the best of luck with the sales of your book.
Wow, thank you so much, Kevin.
My pleasure. And I want to thank you again for joining us on Public Perspective. I'm your host, Kevin McDermott. You can find us every Saturday night at 8 on Comcast Channel 19, or see us on the web at publicperspective.tv. So until next time, thank you and good night.